He talked to me like I was a mistake someone forgot to fix. Every word from him landed quiet but sharp, not loud enough to call abuse, not soft enough to call care, just that steady erosion that turns confidence into dust. For weeks, I told myself it was fine, that silence was peace, that if I kept my head down long enough, he'd stop needing to prove he was in charge. But silence isn't peace when it's used to measure obedience. It's just another kind of leash. Last night, he stood in front of me and said, "In this house, you follow my orders." Something in me cracked, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I'd spent too long earning respect from people who never intended to give it. So tonight, I won't argue. I won't shout. I'll just let him speak the way he always does. Certain, loud, sure of his place. And when I finally stand, he'll understand what real order feels like. He just doesn't know yet that the silence he built around me is about to turn against him. The road into Maple Valley cut through fields the color of rusted copper. Everything looked calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm people pretend not to see. My mother's voice still echoed from the last call, soft, hopeful, carrying that fragile tremor she gets when she's trying to convince herself that everything is fine. When I turned into the narrow lane, the first thing I noticed wasn't the house, but the flag, perfectly folded against the breeze, and the brass plate nailed beside the door. Colonel Raymond Hale, Ret, integrity, discipline, order. I almost smiled. My mother, who could never live with anyone who raised their voice, now lived under a roof ruled by someone who carved obedience into metal. Raymond opened the door before I could knock. His stance was measured, like a man expecting inspection. He studied me from head to toe. "You must be the tech one," he said flatly. "Evelyn tells me you work for the government, Department of Veterans Affairs." I replied. "Paperwork soldiers." He muttered, the corners of his mouth lifting. Dinner felt less like a meal than a drill. He gestured for my mother to sit, waited until she did, then nodded for me to move my chair closer to the table. The schedule on the wall read 700, breakfast 1200, house maintenance check 1700, chores complete report. "In the kitchen," my mother whispered, almost apologizing, that he used to serve at an airbase, that rules made him feel secure. I nodded, but her eyes gave her away. There was fear hiding behind the explanation. Passing the hallway, I noticed the wall clock ran 3 minutes fast. "If you're on time, you're already late," Raymond said. It sounded harmless, but something about it settled in my chest like a warning. That night, I lay awake on the couch, listening to his footsteps move back and forth, the scratch of a pen across paper. My mother was asleep upstairs. I opened my laptop, its glow the only light left in the room, and whispered to myself, a promise or maybe a plea. 3 weeks. Iolana. You can survive 3 weeks. I didn't know then that this house would teach me what power, dignity, and silence really cost. The first morning began with the sound of his knuckles against my door. The rhythm was sharp, exact, military. He announced the time like a verdict, 700 hours sharp, and I glanced at my watch. 6:57. He tapped the wall clock, its hands running 3 minutes ahead, and said that in this house, time followed discipline, not the other way around. Breakfast wasn't a meal. It was an inspection. He asked for a report on my work, as if I were enlisted. I gave clipped answers while he delivered a sermon about service and structure. My mother tried to soften the air with small talk about the weather, her voice trembling between sentences. Soon, every part of the house began to carry his signature. He taped a chart beside the fridge labeled House Discipline. My mother folded table linens with the precision of someone trying to please a commander, her fingers shaking slightly. Each night, he sat at the kitchen counter, writing in a notebook he called performance notes. Once, I caught a glimpse of a line, Pierce, lacks order. The small humiliations accumulated quietly. He criticized the hour I woke up, the way I worked, the way I moved through the day. when he asked what I actually did for the government and joked that I probably fixed emails. I told him I fixed people who lied about their service records. His laugh was low and certain, the kind of sound made by a man convinced he was untouchable, while helping my mother clean the storage room. I found a photograph of him in uniform. The medals on his chest gleamed, but one detail froze me. The top ribbon was never issued to officers, only to civilian technicians. I took a photo and slid the frame back before he noticed. That night, he told a long story about flying through Iraqi airspace in 1997. I listened without a word, knowing the unit he claimed to lead had never been deployed. A seed of suspicion took root. Later, in my own room, I set a small travel clock on my desk, aligned perfectly with atomic time. It was 3 minutes behind his. That quiet act of precision felt like the first thing in this house that truly belonged to me. One gray afternoon, I visited my grandfather, James Pierce, at the Veterans Home. He had served 30 years in the Navy and carried his authority the way some men carry patience. When I mentioned Raymond Hale, his spoon stopped mid-air. That name, he said finally, wasn't in any command he remembered. Not a colonel. Not even close. Then, with a faint smile, he added that real rank doesn't need to shout. The words stayed with me all the way back down the mountain roads, heavy as the rain starting to fall. That night, I logged into the secured database at the department. I typed in Raymond Hale. The screen filled with red text. Dishonorable discharge. Falsified credentials. 1997. Access restricted. Confirmed by Air Force Legal Division. I sat still, the glow of the monitor washing over the room. Every insult he'd thrown, every order barked across the dinner table, every look he gave my mother replayed in my head. One phone call could expose him, but my mother, fragile, trying to hold her new life together, would be shattered in the blast. So I chose silence, not surrender, but calculation. I began keeping notes of my own, times, words, patterns, evidence, not emotion, because the truth, sooner or later, would need a witness. He must have sensed the shift. His eyes followed me when I reached for my phone. One evening, he asked, too casually, if the government knew what I was doing there. I smiled, steady and small. They know everything, sir. The air went still. In that pause, I felt it. The war had started, and the battlefield was this house. His footsteps woke me before dawn, measured, heavy, deliberate. 3 knocks on my door, sharp as a command. Up, Pierce. The house runs on discipline. He stood in the doorway in a faded Air Force shirt, stopwatch in hand. My mother lingered behind him, her eyes begging me to stay calm. I said I'd been working until midnight. He didn't blink, then learned to rest efficiently. The words were quiet, surgical. From that morning on, he treated the house like a base. If my laptop light stayed on past 10, he'd kill the power, reminding me that screens were banned after 2200. My mother whispered for me to just follow his rules. I told her softly this wasn't a base, it was a home. She didn't answer. I started recording him with the small camera on my laptop, my own quiet defense. One night, I caught him rifling through my bag, my government ID in his hand. He smiled. Just curious, he said, liked to know who lived under his roof. I told him he should have asked permission. Colonel. His expression faltered for the first time. The next week, he created performance charts on the fridge, grading us on attitude and order. He made me do security rounds and lectured about Ramstein Air Base. I said evenly he'd never been stationed there. His eyes went cold. That night, a message came from work. Someone named Raymond Hale was applying to the VA as a retired colonel. I replied, "Don't approve, I'll handle it." He thought he ruled time. I stayed up past midnight, the hallway clock ticking 3 minutes fast, and opened a new file. If he commanded the house, I'd command the truth. The next morning, he was suddenly kind. Too kind. He made coffee, asked about my job, offered to fix my chair. My mother looked hopeful again, saying he'd planned a Veterans Appreciation dinner. invited friends and old comrades. I only nodded. Over the week, he transformed into a director, rehearsing his grand act. Air Force blue napkins, a banner reading honor, duty, family. He told me to write his introduction, claiming I had the words. My mother called it purpose. I called it performance. One night, I found an email sent from a fake department account, signed with my name, praising Colonel Hale's honorable service. He'd forged it using her computer. I printed it, locked it away with his falsified discharge record, and the photograph with the wrong medals. The evidence was ready. I just needed the right moment. At dinner, he raised his glass and said I reminded him of interns who thought knowledge outranked experience. I smiled. Sometimes it does. The room fell silent. He leaned forward, voice low. Be careful, Miss Pierce. Discipline isn't something you can Google. I met his eyes. Neither is truth. That night, I stared at the clock still 3 minutes ahead and whispered, let him keep his timing. The louder he lies, the clearer my silence will sound. The war had begun, and this time, I was the one counting down. The house no longer felt like a home. It had turned into a parade ground. Raymond paced the living room, inspecting every corner, adjusting the lighting, checking the symmetry of each glass. My mother followed him with forced patience, her smile trembling at the edges. He corrected the angle of napkins and moved candles a 1/4 inch to the left, like a man arranging soldiers before inspection. He's just trying to impress people, my mother whispered. It's only one night. I nodded, though the sterile brightness of the table told me this wasn't about a party. It was a campaign, a performance of authority dressed up as virtue. On the wall hung his framed portrait in full uniform. Even from across the room, I saw the seams of the photo edit. The medals gleamed but were wrong. The top ribbon issued to civilian technicians, not officers. The flag behind him was folded incorrectly, the creases backward. It was all a costume, stitched from fragments of a life that never existed. He brushed lint off his jacket, proud of the illusion. Try to smile tonight. Pierce. It's good optics for the family. I met his eyes. Steady. I always smile when the truth's about to surface. His confidence faltered for a heartbeat, but he turned away. As guests began to arrive, veterans from town, a few local officers, even someone from the police department, I texted my team. Verification team ready. Observe quietly. The first crack came early. During his speech about the Ramstein operation of 1997, an older veteran interrupted. Excuse me, Colonel, but Ramstein didn't deploy that year. We were grounded. Silence hit the room like static. Raymond's smile stiffened, his voice stumbling as he changed the subject. My mother tried to rescue the moment, pouring wine. But the air had shifted. Doubt had entered the room. My phone vibrated. VA verification request received. Hail, Raymond. Confirming identity. I glanced at my watch. 8:04 p.m., I replied. Proceed with field verification. Tonight? Minutes later, in the hallway, I caught him adjusting the photo again. The frame slipped, glass cracking against the floor. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a forged discharge certificate. Wrong font, uneven margins, his own handwriting on the date. I picked it up. Calm as ice. Your penmanship's recent. He snatched it back, color flooding his face. Stay out of what you don't understand, I said softly, that I understood better than he thought. Before the honor segment of his dinner began, I pulled my mother aside. Stay with Grandpa tonight. Don't speak. Don't stop me. Her confusion was thick with worry, but I didn't explain. Upstairs, the white uniform hung untouched in my closet. I unzipped the garment bag and ran my fingers over the insignia. Commander, U.S. Veterans Affairs Oversight Division. The weight of the fabric steadied me. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending a lie. The window light caught the badge, scattering pale gold across the floor. The moment had come. Half an hour before the ceremony began. His voice filled the house. He stood in the living room, rehearsing his speech, savoring every word. Tonight, we celebrate integrity, discipline, and the spirit of service. Each repetition of integrity made my stomach tighten. Grandpa James sat quietly in the corner, cane resting across his lap. When I passed him, he murmured, "Let him talk first, then stand." I nodded. There was no anger left in me, only the calm of someone who had already chosen what must be done. By the time the guests settled, the house gleamed with tension. Silverware chimed softly. Raymond straightened his tie and scanned the room like a general preparing for inspection. The wall clock ticked 3 minutes ahead, its false rhythm echoing through the silence. On my wrist, my watch kept perfect time. The difference was small, but truth always starts that way. When he raised his glass, the final act began. "I served with honor," he declared, leading men through storms civilians could never imagine. Across the table, a uniformed officer frowned. Phone in hand, "Colonel Hale, I just looked up your record. There's no active listing for your unit." Every breath vanished. Raymond froze. I knew that was my signal. I stood. He turned toward me, panic flickering behind his eyes. "Sit down, Pierce. This is not your moment." "No, sir," I said, my voice even. "This is yours." I stepped forward and unbuttoned my coat. The white uniform underneath caught the light, insignia gleaming with quiet authority. The room fell utterly silent. Knives and forks stopped mid-air. Then a voice rose from the back, a soft, almost reverent tone. "Officer on deck." Chairs scraped back. Every veteran in the room stood at attention. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled. Grandpa didn't move, just lifted his chin in acknowledgement. Raymond's voice cracked. "This is ridiculous." I walked toward him slowly, meeting his gaze. "You've spent weeks lecturing me about discipline, respect, and honor. Tonight, I'll show you what those words actually mean." No one moved. The only sound was the tick of 2 clocks, one wrong, one right. The silence between them carried more weight than any verdict. It was the sound of truth reclaiming its place. The air in the room held its breath. I stood in my white uniform beneath the sharp light, the silver badge on my chest reading Commander, U.S. Veterans Affairs Oversight Division. The room had gone silent except for the faint tick of the hallway clock, 3 minutes fast, the rhythm of a world about to collapse. Raymond's face drained of color. "You're joking. That's not real." I unpinned my badge and placed it on the table. "It's as real as the discharge you forged." He stumbled, voice cracking as he tried to hold authority that no longer existed. "You're out of line, Pierce." "No, sir." "You are." An officer near the back read from his phone. Voice steady. "File, Raymond Hale, dishonorable discharge, fraudulent rank claims. Case closed, confirmed by Air Force Archives." Heads turned. Someone whispered. He lied to all of us. The dinner had become a courtroom. I stepped closer. "For weeks you've barked orders, belittled, monitored every breath in my mother's home. You spoke of discipline. Real discipline begins with truth." He trembled, searching for words that wouldn't come. My mother's eyes filled, caught between fury and heartbreak. The flag behind him slipped from the wall, its cord snapping. The golden lights flickered out, leaving only the white reflection from my uniform. My grandfather rose, his voice gravel and steel. "Rank isn't worn, it's earned. And tonight, Commander Pierce outranks you by a lifetime." Every guest stood at attention. Raymond's glass shattered in his hand. I turned to my mother. "We're done being commanded." I walked out as the room fell quiet again. Someone behind me whispered, "That's what real command looks like." I didn't look back. Justice didn't need applause. It only needed silence. The morning after felt hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. No footsteps, no clipped commands. Even the hallway clock had gone still. The house command schedule lay on the kitchen table, its edges curled, the tape marks still clinging to the wall like scars. My mother sat at the counter, her hair loose, her face pale. hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She looked at me quietly and asked if I regretted it. I told her I didn't. Silence is mercy until it becomes complicity. And I'd been quiet long enough. By afternoon, the news had spread. The Maple Valley Veterans Chapter struck his name from the registry. The local paper ran a short piece. Former officer exposed for falsified record. No interviews, no outrage, just the cold weight of public silence, the kind that doesn't forgive or forget. He packed without a word. No confrontation, no apology, just the sound of drawers closing. When he reached the door, he looked at me, eyes hollow from pride collapsing in on itself. "You think you won," he said. I answered softly. "No, Raymond, I just stopped losing." That evening, my mother and I painted the living room walls. She removed the doctored portrait, replaced it with a real family photo, me, her, and Grandpa James when I was 8. When Grandpa moved in a week later, he set his old Navy insignia on the shelf beside my uniform photo. The house finally looked like it belonged to truth again. That night, my mother sat beside me, her voice almost a whisper. "You were silent for so long, Iolana, but you were silent the right way. I understand now. Strength isn't always loud. It's knowing when to speak." I took her hand. "Rank stops at the door. Mom. Always." The words settled into the air like a promise. The house, stripped of orders and shame, had found its rhythm again. It was no longer a command post. It was home. 3 months later, I was back in Seattle, the skyline sharp against a pale morning. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, a small ceremony filled the atrium with quiet pride. When my name was called, Commander Iolana Pierce, for upholding the integrity of service, I walked to the stage beneath a banner that read "Integrity above all." My colleagues applauded, steady and sincere. No pomp, no music, just respect. I looked out at the crowd of veterans, men and women who'd carried their service honestly. Some men think rank gives them the right to command. I began. But real leadership isn't about command. It's about conscience. I paused, letting the silence carry the weight of the words. And sometimes, the loudest command is silence. The applause that followed was low, deliberate, real. That evening, at home, I laid my uniform on the bed and folded it neatly. The sunset caught the thread of my name, Pierce, stitched above the heart. I brushed my hand across it, a soft smile forming. He wore stories. I wore the truth. The light dimmed into gold. No ticking clocks, no orders. Just the quiet rhythm of a life finally aligned with its own time.